Hey folks, Zerodha is an anomaly. A unicorn stockbroking startup 1,000 kilometers away from Mumbai, right? The economic capital of India. However, its offices are unlike any brokers in Lower Parel. Its people are unlike any I've met at large financial institutions. And I've worked almost for 15 years in large financial institutions, and I've been running Quico for some time now. It's run more like any other technology startup out of Bangalore. Customers love Zerodha for its products. And Kailash has been at center of it all, right? So, um, welcome to the podcast, Kailash. Kailash's journey essentially started when his dad bought him home a computer, just like a lot of us growing up in early 90s and 2000s. I mean, computers were uh, uh, unique then. From that point onwards, Kailash became an avid hobbyist who worked on numerous projects. We've heard Kailash several times talking about his hobbies projects. But there's very little known fact. Kailash has also PhD in computer science, and he has been CTO at Zerodha, India's largest brokerage firm. I would very quickly also like to introduce Do While. So, Do While is a podcast that talks about building and scaling technology startups, and we'll try to bring forward leaders and disruptors from technology startups, so that you can know about the secrets of building, successful startups, disruptors. So, I think without further ado, I mean, Kailash, how does a journey um, from hobbyist to CTO? I mean, we've heard several times about it, but you several times mentioned that you have a very small. There is a very small tech team at Zerodha, and how did you make that transition in terms of leadership, problem solving, interacting with people? Just give us some insight into what a day in Kailash's life looked like.
I, I don't think there's a transition. I think it has been a gradient. Hobbies to CTO, I mean, that kind of makes this whole thing about being a CTO very different from being a developer, being a hobbies developer. Unfortunately, I guess that is true, the larger industry. But for me personally, no transition has really happened. I was a developer. I am a developer, just that the environment changed. I used to work alone on my hobby projects. Today, I work in a team at Zerodha, building projects. So the not really transition, but the gradient has been very gradual over the last 8 years. And when we started the tech team at Zerodha, it was just me, and I was doing whatever was meant to be, whatever had to be done, picking up little projects. At some point, that I felt that I wouldn't be able to. I felt that there was too much on my plate, and we needed more hands. So we got a first engineer in, and then we started working on things together. And at some point where we realized work's growing, we need another pair of hands, so we got a third engineer. And that's exactly how it's grown from 2013 to 2021. We've always The tech team has grown very slowly. Whenever we felt that we needed more hands to do the work that's meant to be done, we've added more engineers. So 30 there are 33 people today, and that's it. Again, personally, like I said, I don't think being a developer versus being a CTO, that's happened. I was a developer, I am a developer, and an average day uh, kind of looks like exactly that for me. There's talking to people. There's a lot of talking to people today. That's surely a big difference. So there's writing software, talking to people, and lots of memes and jokes, wasting each other's time, making really silly, lame jokes. So that's yeah, that's how it's been.
So I think that's a very good segue. I mean, I've been to Zero the offices, and it's like I already said, it's unlike any other kind of financial companies. It's more like a technology startup out of Bangalore. So why build? I've asked this to Nathan. I mean, why build Zero out of Bangalore? Was there never a temptation to pack your bags and move to like Mumbai in pursuit of something?
Not at all. I mean, Zerodha's original idea when Zerodha started in 2010, the Zerodha Tech started in 2013. So when Zerodha started, it was already slated to be a very different business. Of course, it had a drastically different pricing model, but from the get go, there was no plan to be a brick and mortar broker. It was an online broker uh, with a very different pricing model. And Nitin happened to be a Bangalorean, so it was just organic. And you really did not need Mumbai at that point. Internet penetration was slowly increasing. I still remember early 2010s. You had Redbus, Flipkart. Stuff like that was slowly becoming commonplace. So, internet only trading is exactly how Zerodha started out, and it could have been anywhere. Nitin happened to be a Bangalorean, so it happened to be in Bangalore. And again, over the last many years, we've never felt the need to move anywhere else for any particular reason.
Right. So I think I would kind of borrow from what you said. So, and booking movie tickets, bus rides,
Yeah,
ride hailing, right? We all do it in our day-to-day lives.
yeah,
But I mean, there was no blueprint to build a brokerage out of Bangalore, right? So,
yeah.
how did you guys go about it, and what made you so successful in building that amazing product out of Bangalore?
There's definitely no blueprint today, or maybe today there is at least examples like us to look up at. But 8 years ago or 10 years ago, there was no blueprint on how to build a modern ticket booking or e-commerce kind of experience in finance. But what we kind of had, we got really lucky there, was the luxury of time. And 2010s, mid 2010s, up until maybe 3 years ago, things were really quiet in the markets. And we, for whatever reasons, all these random variables helped us be in an environment, build an environment where we were able to experiment really slowly and do it at our own pace and not really compete with anyone. Because what we were trying to do was a really niche thing in stock markets. We were a nobody in front of the really big financial institutions. So there was no competing with the big financial institutions. So we were just trying to build our niche. And then at some point, the playing field leveled and we were suddenly competing with the big folks. But until then, it was just that no specific pressure or timeline, right market conditions, right people with the right vibes that gave us the environment to experiment without any baggage or expectations. We could do whatever we felt like doing.
Right. So I've heard Nitin saying this several times, that somehow you guys found yourself in the right place at the right time. Right? That's not a
Yeah.
coincidence, right? So how does that happen? How do you use technology and be in the right place at the right time? I mean, whenever you are operating in a highly regulated space, there's
Yeah.
continuously something happening from regulations point of view.
Yeah.
But how do you build technology ahead of time? Because that has been the differentiator for Zerodha.
Right place, right time is again extremely important. If you started a broking firm today, the conditions are completely different. It's an uphill battle, and
Right.
pricing is no longer a there's no longer any competing on pricing. Everybody's 0 and 20 rupees, and regulations have changed entirely. So that period, early 2010s, it was definitely right place, right time. And how Nitin and I met, that was a complete coincidence. That was also right place, right time. But coming to technology, of course, you couldn't just do random things and expect for it to work. For that,
Right.
you really had to put a lot of thought and effort to build technology the right way. Now, it's very difficult to define what exactly the right way is, but there are certain universal principles when writing software, be it a stock trading app or be it an e-commerce app. Uh, there are certain universal, common sense principles that you have to apply building the front end, building the back end systems, building the architecture. So you do those things, you do technology the right way. The odds of everything working out when the time comes is it's exponentially higher than random carpet bombing like efforts. So there is definitely that you have to put in a lot of thought and effort and technical competence, and then when the time comes, it may work out. There's a much higher probability of it working out. So it's just that there's no formula, there's no framework. It's just that common sense.
Right? And we've all seen that, right? The meteoric growth over last year and a half since COVID hit.
Yeah,
We've seen more and more people working from home, participating in capital markets. There's a huge rush of retail investors.
yeah,
And somehow, Zerodha fortunately finds itself in the right place with completely online onboarding workflows.
yeah.
So is that thought process is what went into developing Kite APIs? Because I've heard in Vasant and Nitin small case podcast that without Kite there's no Rainmatter, right? So
Yeah.
what went into the early idea of Kite, and what is the future of Kite? I mean, what is Zero that trying to do with Kite?
Kite was a coincidence. So Kite Connect, the whole broking as a platform stack, kind of happened in late 2014, early 2015. But this was a very different time. We barely had several thousand clients who'd use our platform. So building an API system back then, even before we had a trading platform, wasn't really a product vision or goal or strategy or anything we had. So Kite Connect really was the outcome of good enough design. So we'd abruptly decided to build our own trading platform without actually knowing how to build a trading platform. So we started from scratch. We decided not to look at any other existing platforms to not be burdened by the baggage of legacy. That's why from the very beginning, Kite looked like a whole different app, nothing like any other trading apps. So when we were building Kite, when we were designing the systems, we we ended up making nice, easily consumable, usable APIs for ourselves for the Kite front end. And we had a nice documentation also for ourselves. It was really just the two of us working on it, Vivek and I. And at some point, we figured that these APIs actually look quite cool. We even have a documentation. This kind of looks like Stripe APIs, and everybody was talking about Stripe APIs and how Stripe uh, completely changed the payment landscape with the clean API. So there's no roadmap for APIs or opening up Zerodha as a stack because we don't even have a trading platform yet in 2014. But this happened, and we were like, this is quite cool. And as developers, it'd be really cool to just give this out. And we made that decision. And zero business angle there, just that, it'll be nice to offer APIs. Coincidentally, at the same time, we were talking about getting other startups to come build technology in financial markets because absolutely nothing was happening. And Nitin and I would have this conversation constantly that there's so much to build. Obviously, we can't build everything. We need others to also come build. And nobody was really building any technology in financial markets. It was very unattractive capital markets, and there was no VC funding flowing in. Regulatory red tape was also quite thick. And then these two threads kind of coincided. We're like, oh, we have this thing called we have this API system. We can let others build investment platforms on top of us without actually having to reinvent a whole brokerage from scratch. And then on the other hand, our intention of our desire to bring others into capital markets coincided, and we're like, you know what, let's start investing some of our modest profits, put it up as an offer for people to come build. You get APIs to plug into the markets practically overnight, to get your API key, HTTP JSON APIs. Also, we'll give you seed funding if we like your idea. So those things just happened, and that's how Rainmatter happened. And as you said, small case, coincidentally, we met small case at some point in 2015, I think, completely coincidentally, and we liked their idea. They liked our APIs, and we just happened to have the APIs ready. And then it just snowballed. Lots of things have been built on top of Kite Connect, and it's used extensively. Our own platforms, we dogfood Kite Connect APIs with our own platform. So Kite, the app, or any other investment platform that's built on top of Kite Connect, they're all first class, API clients. So that's really how Kite Connect has happened. We don't really have a future roadmap for Kite Connect planned, just like we never had one planned in the very beginning either. It's just happened organically.
Right.
Uh, and Kite Connect keeps, as we add more and more features into Kite in across our trading platforms, they get assimilated into Kite Connect. So it's constantly growing, incrementally improving. So that really is our future roadmap also. It keeps improving and new use cases come up.
So I'm going to deep dive there a little bit because we can correlate to a lot of what you said.
Yeah,
And for us, building Sandbox was just an act of externalizing the
yeah,
APIs that we were. And along the way, we realized as we started building APIs for others,
yeah,
our coding skills improved. We
yep,
started paying attention to a lot of details that otherwise we weren't, right?
yep,
Because
yep,
when you
yep,
build a bad API and you are the only consumer, you are the only one kind of paying for it.
yep,
Um, so you in between said building technology right way, and you said it's very difficult to define. But can you define it for us in context of Kite Connect and API ecosystems in general? That what's the right way of building an API ecosystem? And does your hobbyist open source endeavor and the value system that it represents somehow kind of help because it's without any expectations, right? Making sure that community can access it.
yeah.
Does that somewhere play into it?
Difficult question to answer, but I'll try and bring some perspective to it. My personal perspective. Right way would be not really hitting the right trade-offs, not really compromising too much on technology or too much on the business side of it. So always maintaining balance when it comes to very technical decisions, architectural decisions. So when it comes to an API, really simple things, it should be easy for developers to read and understand. They should be able to look at the documentation, immediately understand it. uh, Field names in the API should be consistent. The naming convention of API endpoints, we're talking about HTTP APIs, that should be consistent.
Right.
And it's really, really simple baby steps, right? So we did these things for ourselves, and in the end, it became a spin off. Just like you said, you were able to externalize. So just that way of thinking that it should be easily accessible even for our internal purposes kind of already made the APIs external. Otherwise, we could have not built a nice, consistent API layer on top of our vendor black boxes, and we'd have hard coded some really ancient, poorly designed SOAP APIs into our systems, and there'd be no Kite Connect. But just that decision to have nice, documented, well laid out internal APIs with nice names resulted in this massive spin-off. So it could be something as simple as that. And another point that you said, dogfooding, I think is extremely critical. When the outside world and you yourself consume the same APIs, you're kind of forced to constantly maintain quality. You can never, you're in a position where you can never compromise on the APIs because it'll break all the external clients. So that approach automatically puts you in a place where you have clean abstractions, and whatever you build inside magically automatically become features that the outside world can consume without you having to spin this off as a separate product. So as I said earlier, everything that we add to Kite Connect for ourselves magically becomes available to everybody else, and we don't have to think twice about it at all. So I mean, again, this is a little hard to define, but these are kind of the right trade-offs that can uh, that can push you in the right direction.
Right.
And coming back to FOSS, I guess, I mean, I'm heavily influenced by FOSS. I learned how to write code by reading code that was pasted on the internet for free by others. So my entire mental framework is tightly intertwined with FOSS. And absolutely. So again, this is very hand wavy, anecdotal, but again, as you said, accessibility, making things accessible, making things extensible, making things modular for reuse, these are all strong tenets of FOSS. You make software so that somebody else can reuse it and build on top of it. You make and publish open source libraries for others to build on top of. So when you're so entrenched in that line of thinking, every bit of software that you write, even internal, external, you automatically try to draw boundaries in such a way that they are still modular and extensible. So yes, absolutely, such thinking definitely plays a part in designing systems, even if they are proprietary or commercial. And
Right.
these are the vestiges that you see in the form of, open access, accessibility, etc. I don't know if that made any sense, but just
No, it
very
absolutely made sense. So I'll share an interesting story. So I mean, we've heard so much about test-driven development, right?
yeah,
But as we built out Sandbox, one thing we started doing a little differently is instead of building code bottom up, we started building it top down. So you would first write our API documentation and the contracts,
yeah,
and then go mock out everything behind it.
yeah,
And this brought tremendous clarity. Like you said, I mean, when you're building API, not just for yourself,
yeah,
but others, I think that API contract becomes so important.
absolutely, yeah,
So it absolutely made sense. I think I've maybe these numbers are outdated, but I've heard it from you, Nathan. Today, Zerodha does 15% of the volume on the exchanges.
yeah.
And you said 6 million ticks per second as the data we are streaming. Um, how did you scale APIs? I mean, were there, I'm pretty sure you've often talked about self hosting. Were there any challenges in terms of self hosting? What were the important technology kind of decisions? Was it proactive or reactive? Every time the servers ran out of memory, we scaled it, or we anticipated the growth and kind of change in infrastructure and technology around it. So, give us some insight about it, because I think that's the problem statement that all of us face.
Yeah.
Anybody who is growing at a breakneck pace.
It was definitely uh, proactive. In the beginning, it was, I wouldn't say reactive. In the beginning, there was nothing. When we launched Kite, we had a few hundred users using it, and we didn't expect 100,000 users or a million users at all. Those things have just happened very organically and exponentially over the last 2 years. So if if we never really anticipated, breakneck growth at all, and especially what happened, post COVID lockdowns. So if we hadn't been proactive with our systems across the stack, from our onboarding systems to trading platforms to everything, I don't think we'd have been able to cope with the sudden 6x growth practically overnight. So if you want to handle big surges, you have to be proactive. I mean, you may not expect a 10x surge, you may not have any such baseline. But again, doing things the right way, the modular, extensible way, you automatically leave enough room to handle surges to whatever extent. And Jan, coming back to numbers, so we actually, it's 30 to 40 million ticks per second. It's not actually 6 million. Those numbers have changed drastically. And last year, Jan, Feb, we were doing 2 million trades a day. And post March, when the lockdowns happened, when activity suddenly exploded, we from 2 million we went to like 10 million in a couple months, and we had never ever anticipated. Nobody had anticipated COVID. Similarly, we hadn't anticipated such growth. But when it did happen, we had enough leeway in our systems and architecture to quickly scale up without having to scramble and struggle. we had to we just had to tune a few knobs. We didn't have to rebuild everything, just because, like I said, we had the right things done right in the right places when the time came. We didn't really anticipate 10x growth, but systems, when we build them, we always anticipate some growth. So ideally, there should never be a case where suddenly you're exceeding your RAM and you're getting screwed on a fine day. That level of anticipation without specific user numbers should still be there. And let's say you are about to run into system resource limits, there should be a way in the architecture for you to scale horizontally or vertically or whatever. So those pieces, those knobs have always, they have to be there in whatever software, whatever system, for you to scale. And if you don't have them and suddenly you are in a place where where you're growing extremely fast, it's going to be very difficult to manage.
No, absolutely. So I think kind of changing gears from producing APIs to consuming APIs, right? So I've heard stories about Zerodha being very particular about consuming external APIs. So tell us about what goes behind it. I mean, what are the principles that technology team at Zerodha follows? What do you look for in an external API before you start consuming it? I know you always talked about in terms of SaaS, there's so much focus on FOSS and self-hosting.
Yeah,
Um, Give us some insight in terms of APIs because a lot of us are not just producing APIs, but we are also consuming APIs.
yeah.
And what are the indicators? What do you look for?
There are, it's complex. Each, it really depends on uh, individual business use cases. You might have to consume APIs from the income tax department to do a certain verification, and there's no way you can not consume. You have to. So there's no
Right.
questions there. But there could be, I don't know, let's say some sort of a, I mean, I'm making this up, data processing thing where you have certain kind of data, you post it somewhere, they process it for you, you get it back. Now that, yes, it's convenient to use that API, but would you rather build a third external dependency if it's core to your business? So that really is the crux of the matter. There are
Right.
unavoidable APIs that you have to connect to, but everything else, if you want to scale, if you want to design, if you want to have the agility to change your business, or you know cope with exploding growth on your tech stack, you have to understand and own your business end to end. You have to understand and own your tech stack end to end. Otherwise, you may end up building your entire moat on somebody else's proprietary system. And it's not just moats. If you want to scale, I mean, it really is it requires tremendous amounts of engineering, certain things to scale, concurrency, users, traffic. If you have a piece which is somebody else's and all you have is a network connection to them, to this external system, different company with a different culture, different way of working, black box technology stacks that you don't understand, how could you possibly be confident that tomorrow when you really need to, scale this piece, you'll be able to? Now, as I said, there are many unavoidable scenarios where you have to do that, but so those decisions really have to consider those specific use cases. Even if you consume externally, let's say that the carpet gets pulled from under your feet, will that completely disrupt your business? So there are all these questions that we ask, and we want to be as self sufficient and self-sustaining as possible. So whatever we can do internally, we will do. And one of the really simple, common sense 101 principles of scaling a system is to reduce the number of dependencies, be it a library, be it a third-party API, be it anything. So yeah, these are the factors that go into those decisions.
Is that what goes into building your own OMS? I mean, most people
Absolutely, yeah.
when when getting it from vendors, and including Bloomberg's and all are competing for it. Thomson Reuters have previously worked at. Uh, what motivates Kailash and team to go on a adventure like that? We're gonna build our own order management system.
So it's this: if you don't own a piece of technology that is critical to your business, or a process that's critical to your business, you can never really sleep in peace. I mean, what guarantee is there that 2 years from now you will still be able to use it? I mean, if you're renting somebody else's system, and let's say it's not such an unavoidable system, like I said, tax APIs, there's nothing you can do. You have to
Right.
build on top of them. So you can never really sleep in peace. How could you possibly have any sort of business plan or growth plan when the keys are held by somebody else? Be it a key business process or a key piece of technology. So that really is it. And for us, our external vendor dependencies, we have very few, but the ones we have been unavoidable so far. But over the years, we've reduced dependency, piece by piece, bit by bit, and 95% of the dependency is now gone. We handle all of that within our stack. It's been an uphill battle. So this was not something that we decided overnight. That this philosophy, I mean, I guess that also ties back very strongly into the FOSS philosophy of having the liberty. complete freedom and liberty to own and do whatever you want to your piece of technology. So it's just that, and the paranoia of being answerable to somebody else for our internal matters, and the growing confidence of doing writing software hands on over many years combined, pushes us to experiment, with even with extremely complex technical projects like trying to build your own OMS. May or may not work, but we know that it's worth the shot. If it doesn't work, you would have lost some time, learned a bunch, but if it does work, it's humongous for the organization.
Great. So, kind of going back to externalizing APIs from being, features of the platform to APIs themselves becoming a product. So,
Yeah.
do you see this as a common business model going forward for a lot of technology companies?
Absolutely. I think API, the term, it used to be a technical term even as recently as 6, 7 years ago in this industry, I remember. But today, everybody talks of API. Even non technical executives in large financial companies, they pitch API in their business meeting. So it has API as a thing has arrived. And everybody, there's API banking, everything's API first. So as a marketing thing, as a general idea of come plug into us, it's already mainstream. I mean, the future is already here. So yeah.
Do you think, however, for example, neo banking, lending, other use cases where one of the things you said is if it's core to you, rather build it yourself.
Yeah.
But some of these business models are built on the core infrastructure borrowed from someone else. Do you think that kind of API ecosystem is sustainable? Do you think that's what you would like to see more?
I mean, unless you're a bank, you need to connect to the to banking infra to build software on top of banking. There's no avoiding that unless you become a bank yourself. And how many people can become banks? So,
Right.
as I said, or you want to interact with the income tax ecosystem, you have to connect to income tax APIs. There's just no way around that. Now, these unavoidable API integrations, it's complicated. There's no answer. Uh, there's also a difference between a private bank offering APIs, and there's a difference between the government offering certain APIs. Even us, what if we suddenly change the terms of Kite Connect tomorrow, and that could be a blow to people who built their businesses, right? But if you want to connect to stock markets, you have to go via a broker or become a broker yourself, which is it's an extremely complex endeavor. So it's murky. Uh, I would still stick to saying these trade-offs have to be evaluated and made sense in those particular contexts. There could be API integrations that may spell doom. There could be ones that carry certain risk, but the payoff may be worth it. Or there could be ones that where it's completely okay to integrate. So it'll be a mix of this. And about sustainability, I'd say we'll start seeing uh, stuff happening over the next few years. I mean, especially maybe neo banks, when banks themselves, that are private entities, they start seeing that it's possible to build these things. I know there's a conflict of interest there. So yeah, I think we'll see some interesting things evolve out of this mishmash of API integrations, but I don't think there's a definitive answer.
Right. So that kind of brings us to the last part of our discussion. I mean, when we built out Sandbox, it came out from a very simple urge of building self-serve, self-onboarding API platform, right? Like you
Yeah,
said with Kite, you can instantaneously get API keys and secret and start coding. That's what we love as a developer.
yeah.
Uh, where would you like to see the API system in India, API ecosystem in India to go? I mean, you are an important voice in technology ecosystem today in India. Do you see more frameworks like NBFC account aggregator? Where do you see the ecosystem going? And what areas do you think ought to be most impacted by it?
I think when it comes to APIs, what we've seen over the last several years is that it has really been finance where all of this has happened. Stockbroking, payments, banking, all the API stuff is really happening here. And now we are starting to hear of APIs for other things, health, drones, stuff like that. So I think this road to making everything extensible via APIs, we're already there, and everybody, governments, organizations, institutions will all attempt to open up APIs to, for whatever reasons, to extend or to capture. So, what would I like to see? I don't really know. I mean, I just like to see things become accessible and extensible in a meaningful way. UPI, it's a cool thing. So many people have built stuff on top of UPI, but it's a little for something that is, let's say, quasi public. It's not so accessible to everyone. So there are APIs. They are kind of open in the way they're presented, but you can't just go sign up and get a key, or there's no KYC thing that you can do online to get a key. You really need to still go through certain channels. I'd like to see accessibility of APIs, whatever they are, improve. They become APIs become more accessible and developer friendly. It's just a small little thing about accessibility, nothing specifically about the kinds of APIs or the kinds of institutions that are offering. But personally, I'd just like to see these things become a little more developer friendly and accessible.
Fantastic. So I think Kailash, we've heard you talk about FOSS so many times, but it was a great pleasure talking to you about how you built out technology at Zerodha, and especially about APIs, because I think that's something that gets underreported sometimes. And I think the idea of do while is to bring leaders like you, also doers, right? Developers, tech leads who actually are making uh, impact at the ground level, and share those ideas. I think you've been a great sport, and it was really wonderful talking to you. And thanks, all of you, for being such patient listeners. And hope you had a great time listening to Kailash. Thank you again, Kailash. This was a wonderful session.
Thank you, Vishnu. It was fun, and thank you for inviting. Thank you.
Super.